Okay, great turnout. So, all right. So we're gonna look at the residential purchase agreement today. I do want to talk real quick about the buyer representation agreement because we are talking about buyers. So let me just share the screen. Share screen. So I've discussed before about the agency disclosure. It's the most important document in real estate as far as if you're dealing with a buyer or a seller. The first document that needs to be signed with any contract is agency. An agency just says, hey, we're an agent. Like people don't know. There are people that don't know what an agent is. So they don't know how agency works. Like I have a family member that still has no idea. I explain it to her all the time. She has some income properties in Santa Monica, and she's always looking to buy. Hello. Talking right now about buyer representation. Real quick. Buyer representation.
If you can get it.
So, I'm just saying I have a family member who has some income property in Santa Monica, and she's always looking for stuff to buy, either for her or for her kids. I don't know, like she thinks I guess she feels like it's for her in her brain, it's like who the first person that calls her about the property is. Like, I don't know, it's really important to her, like who contacts her first about a property. So it really doesn't matter who's contacting who first. Like, so we have listing agreements with sellers, right? So real quick, a listing agreement, there's different types of listing agreements. So when I say different types,
How's the fan club?
how are you doing? How are you doing?
The fan club.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They just love you.
a little, I'll take a little. In general, a listing agreement obligates a seller to pay a commission during the listing period. Okay, so if I sign a residential listing agreement, there's a start date, there's an end date, and basically it says if the seller accepts an offer from anybody during that time, a commission is payable to the listing broker, right? Thanks. Now, there's other things called open listings and non-exclusive listings. None of us should have anything to do with any of those kind of listings. We want exclusive listings. That just means that during the listing period, we are the listing broker. Any deal getting done, we're getting paid, right? Now, we list property, we can also list buyers. So, you know, we can have an agreement with a buyer that anything we show them during our buyer listing period, the buyer's on the hook for a commission to pay us if they move forward with buying the property. Now, the buyer is off the hook for that commission if the seller pays the commission, right? So let's,
Depends.
It depends. So
Yeah, if the seller's commission is.
the seller commission
It's the
could
same
be
as what the buyer is.
less, right? So okay, so here's the form. So here's the form that is the buyer representation agreement. The first document is the agency disclosure. It just says what an agent is, and it's talking basically about the broker. So there's agents, brokers that represent buyers, represent both seller and buyer, represent just a seller. So obviously we represent everybody. We represent sellers, we represent buyers, and we also represent both buyers and sellers. And responsibility is being honest and truthful. That's our responsibility. We can't do anything shady. Whenever I'm sitting with a seller and they have, you know, anytime any attorney might feel like there's no such thing as dual representation in being fair. Like you can't represent a party on both sides of the transaction and be fair about it. There's no way to do it. According to an attorney, right? You should have a representative of the seller, representative of the buyer. Now, when I'm sitting with a seller, they might be opposed to dual agency, right? They don't want me to represent a buyer. But my conversation with a seller is, if someone comes into this open house or comes to the property without an agent, I'm the best person to facilitate the transaction. I'll write their offer for them because I'm the best person to do that. And we have direct communication. There's no middleman. Like I can facilitate the deal. I want to put the deal together. My duty to you as the seller is always to get you the most money. That's always the bottom line. I am here for you to get you the most money. My duty to the buyer is full disclosure. I can't hide anything from the buyer, but that's it. I mean, the buyer really is the one who's not getting my full, right? Like, I don't want the deal to blow up. I might, and I'm not, there might be some advice that I don't give the buyer that I normally would if I only represented the buyer. Like, because my duty is to the seller to get them the most money. So, you know, a buyer is at a disadvantage walking in and to an open house saying and writing an offer with a listing agent. So if I'm talking to a buyer who says, I only want to go and use the listing agent to write my, that's a really bad idea for a buyer because he has no representation. He really doesn't. The listing agent is just there. He'll write his offer. He'll get the deal. But you know, a buyer really has to, buyer who's not sophisticated, they don't buy that many properties, they can really get hurt on a deal. And in real estate, we're talking about big numbers. So we're there to protect our buyers if we're representing a buyer. And what protection means is full disclosure and full investigation. So I like to remove doubt in a deal. If a buyer knows exactly what they're buying, then perfect, you know. And every property has a price, right? So no matter what you show me, it could be the worst property on the planet. It has a price. There's something that someone will pay for. So as long as the buyer knows what he's buying, we're good. Okay. So this is the form used for buyer representation. It's an agency disclosure first because that has to be signed. If there's no agency, there's no commission due. So that's really important. Page 2 is just the civil code saying that we need to use an agency disclosure. And this is the law, and that it says what verbiage needs to be on it. So this page 1 conforms with the law. I'm not sure why they even include this on page 2, but we wouldn't need it, but it shows that we are compliant. Fair housing, we can't discriminate. We can only discriminate against money. That's the only thing you can discriminate against.
Actually, somebody tell me that we cannot even ask for social security of the tenant anymore on the Fair Housing Act. I say he took the course and they told me you cannot ask for social security, you can only ask for the income. There is so many restrictions they put on that.
So
You're not allowed to ask if they're on social security?
No, you ask for social security number to credit the check.
you're saying that a tenant no longer has to provide their social security number?
Yeah, that's what I was told. By
Okay,
the guy who
could be.
took
I'm gonna look into it.
They look into that by the guy who took the course, he said Fair Housing Act. He said there is other restriction on that one also. You can ask for income.
Okay, I will look into it. But here it says protected classes characteristics. Race, color, ancestry, natural origin, religion. I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, you can always discriminate against money.
Yeah.
So you can always take the person who's offering more money, right?
Yes,
So that's it. That's the only discrimination in real estate, money. As long as you're on money, it's okay. Social security, you know, that shows character of a person. Do they pay back their debts? Do they pay on time?
Yeah.
That's a very, very important thing for a landlord. I would be shocked if that is true. I'm not surprised because California is
They come
nuts.
with this governor.
I wouldn't be shocked, but I find it very,
It could be, he told me he took the course.
it's very damaging to a landlord.
It's
to
very,
do that.
very.
So,
yeah,
but
very-
nothing in California will shock.
yeah.
Okay, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. The reason that this form exists is to avoid litigation.
The only thing.
Oh, Ronson, is that you? Ronson?
Yeah, I was saying the only thing I heard about is that you cannot get their money. Say they're on disability. They may be on disability for life, but
Okay.
you can't discriminate because of that.
Okay. Right. Well, if someone is making money, no matter how it's coming in, that's good for me to know. I mean, but I'm not right. Why would I discriminate against someone on disability? That wouldn't make sense to me. I mean, I just if I know someone has income, that's the most important thing to me. So
Right.
you know,
Right.
I'm just, it's all about the money. You know, can they afford the rent? Great. Can they not? Fine. If someone's willing to pay more for a property that's for sale, I have to go with that person. Unless there's something really enticing about another offer. Someone may come with a lower priced offer, but it's all cash. There's no loan contingencies, no appraisal. So I might go with that. You know, I don't know. So, but you know, I'm going with money. That's the only thing I'm looking at. My eyes are just, I have a green filter on. This form exists, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, just because we are saying upfront, hey, there's a possibility. This covers every scenario. A buyer, a listing broker is representing more than one seller, obviously. That listing could also be listed by more than one broker. It could be co-listed. It could be listed by multiple agents in the same office. It could be listed by different brokers. You might have a listing that's listed by different brokers and the buyer comes in and they're represented by different agents from a different broker, or even agents from two different brokers. So this is just, or the same person, agent, broker is representing everybody. So this just talks about every possible scenario. And it also says that offers are not necessarily confidential, which means that the listing agent and the buyer's agent is able to discuss anything that has to do with the offer. And now the listing agent probably won't discuss certain things for negotiation reasons, right? Those are negotiations. They are allowed to. So if you ask a seller if he has offers, he can tell you exactly how many, he can tell you who the buyer is, how much money they're putting down. He can tell you everything about that offer. It's not confidential. And if you want confidentiality, there is a form called confidentiality, but it would have to be signed by everybody, literally everybody, both brokers, both agents, buyer, seller, and it has to be signed before the offer is presented. Because if it's not, no one's agreed to confidentiality, right? So if you have a high profile client, they want confidentiality, then you can explain to them that there is a confidentiality form that needs to be signed by the listing agent, the listing broker, the buyer's agent, them, seller, maybe even escrow is gonna have to sign it, title's gonna have to sign it. It's really hard to keep stuff confidential. Someone's gonna leak it, it's gonna get on TMZ. You just don't want it coming back to you, basically. Okay. Wire fraud is a real thing. Most wire fraud is committed by hackers that somehow are able to get into the escrow company's email account. So if a hacker can gain access to an escrow's email account, they could pretend that they are the escrow officer. They will send an email from the escrow's email account, pretending that's them, with their bank information. Okay, saying, hey, congratulations on opening up your new escrow. Here's where your deposit should be sent. And the email is being generated by a fraudster. Yeah.
Should you notify your buyer to wait until there's a conference call with the escrow?
Before your client is wiring money,
Exactly.
they should call
No,
escrow.
but would you do a conference call?
It doesn't need to be a
necessarily.
conference call, but you want to make sure that whoever's
call
wiring
them.
money calls who they're wiring it to and receives and confirms over the phone the account number and the routing number. 100%. And an agent that I'm that I'm dealing with right now, her dad lost $500,000
But he's not gonna
last
sue-
year.
He's not gonna
He's
sue
out,
the-
he's out that money. He
Half
lost
a million?
he lost $500,000.
He can't sue the agent, right? No,
Sue the agent?
no, he cannot sue anyone.
I
He's
mean,
liable.
I just heard a couple of days ago, Chase Bank is not making someone whole that had wire fraud.
He's not making.
They're not making someone whole. They're not reimbursing their
Reversing.
Chase Bank. Someone set up a wire through Chase Bank to a fraudulent place
Not-
and Chase is not
And nobody's
reimbursing.
liable, escrow's not liable.
So the thing is, if you go on Chase now and you do even a Zelle transaction, there's something that pops up on the screen that says, be aware of fraud, and you have to, there's like 2 things you need to click, I approve now. That didn't used to be there.
But no escrow, no agents are liable if something like this happens.
I know, I never use the word never.
Oh, okay. No,
So-
what-
So this form is here to protect
To protect
you
us.
and me, because, hey, we told you, you better confirm it first. Okay, that's why the form's here.
Thank you.
Uh,
When you call the buyer, you ask the buyer what, when you tell them about the market.
I just tell my buyer to have a phone conversation with escrow before they wire the money to confirm the account number and the routing. Okay. So this form is the buyer representation agreement. I'm just going over this because we're talking about offers today and buyers. You can have a buyer work with you exclusively. You can even take a buyer just to one property if you want. So this is basically saying who the buyer is, how long the period is good for, and then the property that's being acquired. You can put a location in here, like a city. You can put a zip code. You can put a price range, and you can just say, or the following specified property only, could be for one address, or you can put a bunch of properties on a list. Or you can just write in, but you want to narrow it. You don't want to say any property. You want to have some kind of,
Price range
but
and-
if you put a price range, make sure it's a lot higher and lower than they tell you. So if I have a client telling you they want to find a house in Beverly Hills for $3.5 million, this will say Los Angeles County from 2 million to 7 million. Like, I'll make it a wide range because chances are I'm going to show them stuff, or there's not going to be something available in the price range you're looking. They're going to have to spend more. I don't want to lock myself out. So buyer agrees to pay broker as follows.
I have a quick question, actually.
Yeah.
In the previous section, for location, I just put California.
So
That's what I do.
you can. I'm just afraid it might be too broad and challengeable.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make it not challengeable. Everything's challengeable. I'm just trying to lessen that, right?
Challenge.
Because California is so broad. They can make an argument. Yeah, he gave me this thing. I signed it. It says California, but he doesn't work in San Francisco. Right? So, right, there could be a challenge there. Like, were you expected to work in San Francisco? Not expected? Was there a conversation? Not a conversation? I don't even want to have that conversation. Okay, so broker's right to compensation. It basically says if the buyer buys something according to number 3, they're going to have to pay us this amount that they're agreeing to. There's also an additional part that we fill in down here on the bottom that goes beyond the listing time. So what that says is we have a time period that we're showing our buyer's property. It could be for 5 days, it could be for 1 day, it could be for 10 days. But then we're going to give them a list of identified properties. So whatever it was, we're going to give them that list before this expires. And then that there's a little time period at the bottom of that page that says if I put in 180 day, you can put in whatever you want. If they write an offer and it gets accepted within that time period, you're liable, you're enabled for your commission, basically. You're protected. Now, why would anyone sign this? Because it says here how we get paid. Just want to make sure where it is. I usually have this highlighted. I'm sorry. So the clause that I'm looking for, it says if the buyer is off the hook if the funding comes from someone else, which is the seller. Sorry. Accounting for payments to brokers by others. It's right here. If anyone other than the buyer compensates the broker for services covered by this agreement, that amount shall be credited toward buyer's obligation to pay.
Yeah.
So before a comment was made that maybe it covers them, right? Maybe they're off the hook. Okay, so they're off the hook so if we take them to a listing that's offering 2.5% and they're on the hook for 2.5%, they're completely off the hook. But let's say we take them to a listing that's only offering 2%. Technically, they are on the hook for that extra 0.5%. Right, so that's what we were talking about before? Yeah. So, and also, what if they find a property that's not on the market at all? So this protects us. Like, what if we're talking to someone else in the office that's telling us about something they know about that's not listed, and their seller won't sign a thing, okay? We're gonna try to get compensation from the seller, but what if their seller just refuses to sign it, right? We're protected by our buyer. Doesn't our buyer want us to tell them about a property we know about? For sure they do. So you can tell them, I'm gonna be showing you property maybe that's not on the market and the seller hasn't signed anything yet. We're gonna try to get paid by the seller. But just in case the seller doesn't want to pay my commission, are you okay paying that? Right? I mean, of course a buyer is going to want to hear about it. What's the worst they can do? Just not make it on, right? That's the worst they can have. So that's really it. Now, if you use this form, if you use a buyer representation form, there is an additional form which is new that you will have to use when you make an offer and before you close. And it's called the anticipated broker compensation disclosure. So this is something new. The buyer needs to be made aware of how much the agent is making. It's a full on the transaction. It's a full
On this
disclosure.
transaction.
Yes, it's a full disclosure to the buyer. So when you write an offer, you're going to include this form with your offer. Okay, yeah, it's the anticipated broker compensation disclosure.
At that price, I mean,
So it basically
At what
says,
price?
it says here, broker anticipates receiving compensation from seller or seller's broker if buyer purchases any property identified below. And then you're going to enter the address in the middle there. And it's the CSO is what you're going to enter, which is the commission to the selling office. That's what's advertised in the MLS. Yes.
I sent an RPA out yesterday and I didn't include that.
Do you have a buyer representation agreement signed with your buyer? You do. Okay, so this is required. Or if you don't use this form, you can use an MLS agent detail form. Just as long as you send to, so what I would do right now is I would go on the MLS and I would pull up an MLS agent detail and send that to them.
My clients get copies of that. every week.
Perfect. No, but the agent detail though, not the client.
Yeah, no, I give them the agent.
If they have
Just in case I need a number. or
If they
something,
have
like
the
that.
agent detail, then the CSO is disclosed.
Cool.
And you're good.
Done.
Okay, now, before closing, there's a section here at the bottom. It says, this section to be completed upon close of escrow when the final compensation is determined. And then, basically this is going to be an end disclosure. So that this is something that's needed when you use the buyer representation agreement. Any comments? I'd love any comments you got, because do a lot of
Well, I mean,
transactions.
I think all this is great for 2023.
Yeah.
After these lawsuits.
Right.
DOJ.
Yeah, I mean, every document here is to protect us from a lawsuit.
2024 is a whole new ballgame.
Right, there are new forms coming out. We'll talk about those, yeah. Question?
Well, it's actually a comment. I moved here from Nashville. in
Okay, welcome.
2006.
Okay,
I had a huge entertainment manager buy an office building. I had a buyer's rep agreement.
okay.
They bought with another. broker,
Residential or commercial?
Commercial,
Okay,
but my broker and the team leader wouldn't enforce it. They said that they did, this was 2006.
Yeah.
They didn't want the publicity of Keller Williams suing the client in Nashville for $83,000 of commission. So they said, suck it up, move on, and guess what? Andrew and I are about to close this guy in the next year, property out here in California, because we're still friends. Because if I didn't force that and made him pay me,
Yeah.
it would have ended our relationship.
Yeah, so.
But I just want to say that every once in
Yeah.
a while, you might find yourself in a little sticky situation where they're not going to enforce it. You can have all the paperwork in the world, but it might be bad for the company
Right,
to go after them.
so because, right, everything is broker decision.
Right.
Yeah, because.
And at that point, we were so small in Nashville, we were the number 5 brokerage. We had to listen to all the stories of drinking juice at the office and.
So the buyer that didn't pay you, you maintained your relationship with him.
Absolutely, we've been friends since 1984.
So
He manages
did he feel
kids.
guilty? I mean,
No, you know what? It was the girl he bought a building. I had an off-market building. He bought a building that didn't fit the criteria. He used a brand new agent who did it for half the commission. She did it for 30 grand as opposed to the 83 I was gonna make.
Oh.
It was about money. Like you said, it was all about money for him. But yes, I went over and sucked it up and smiled at him and said,
So-
hey, this is a huge learning curve, Doc.
Yeah. So I would say in general, people do feel morally obligated. They do in general. In the
But I
cor-
prefaced that he's an entertainment manager, so he didn't feel morally
Yeah.
obligated to anything.
in the commercial world, it's a little more cutthroat. And the way that I look at it is residential agents are brought up in a world of we share, we have MLSs, we share commissions. Commercial agents are brought up in the I didn't learn sharing in kindergarten world. Because when they go in a commercial agency, they get handed a phone book. They said, make your calls. And if you find a lead, give it to me, is what the mentor is saying. And then the mentor will tell his clients about it. If his clients aren't interested, he'll tell some other agents in his company about it. And it's very internal, my deal, my deal, my deal. And it's just a different, I don't blame them. That's how they were raised. So that's how I look at it.
So they're not realtors, right?
They are not a lot of them are not
But
real.
Shai and Dario are realtors.
It could be. I mean, they would have to join the board of realtors, and if they were a realtor member, then they have a code of ethics. Right. So
Which we hope. that
if
they
if they're not a realtor member, then they only need to obey the law, which is pretty broad. Right. Okay, so I just wanted to show that. All right, let's go into the purchase agreement. Okay. So this is the residential purchase agreement, and you access that through CAR or through the installable version of zip form. I love that CAR has combined all the necessary forms. There are a couple of additional forms I would add to your offer. There is a form called Market Conditions Advisory. I'll show you that one real quick. This is
in the residential, it's all in there, no?
if you pull up the residential listing agreement,
It has that much, it's done.
it doesn't have the Market Conditions Advisory. It does not. I want to. This is a great form for you guys to read, and also any buyer. It really has a ton of information on it and really explains a lot about a transaction. Now, what is a market condition? So a market goes up and down and back up, right? I always say and back up at the end, because I don't want to leave on, it goes up and down. Market, in a market, it could be a commodity, anything, stock, gold, oil. Prices go up, they go down, they go back up. Real estate markets are cyclical and change over time. It's impossible to predict future market conditions. your clients are always gonna ask you, what's this gonna be worth in the future? Am I gonna make money on this, right? Should I buy this? The answer is, I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. No one can promise you something's gonna be
When
worth
I
more.
say that nobody lost money in real estate, that's not gonna zero down to it.
Right, so I just emailed Brandon Miller with
Yes.
Fidelity. Brandon Miller he's the title officer that works with us with Fidelity National Title. You'll see him at our office meetings. He once gave me a flyer years ago that showed from the 1930s, since they've been tracking the average price of homes in California. And it had the average price from 1930 every single year up until present. And what he was showing me was, no matter what year you bought, 10 years later, it was worth more.
Yes,
So that's a great thing to show clients.
right,
Say, "Oh, I just emailed him this morning. Can we get an updated copy of that for the office?"
right.
It's a great tool. But this talks about considerations, offering price. Before we write an offer, we want to send comps to our buyer. It's the most important thing, is to send comps. We need to see for ourselves, is it worth less or more than the asking price that the listing agent put it at? And then we also need to talk to the listing agent. How did you get to your price, right? How did you arrive at it? Did you pick it? Did the seller pick it? You're gonna get a lot of information from the listing agent when you just ask them how they arrived at the price. Like, it's a question you ask and then you just don't talk anymore. Let them talk, right?
Like last year when it was a seller market, the broker said, this is what you have to pay, I have 15 offer. Take it
Right,
or leave
But
it.
by
This is
just,
what you have to take.
so,
You want probably have to pay more money on that.
right.
This is what you.
So
think
I'm
is
gonna
worth.
let the listing agent talk as much as possible. And even if it's an uncomfortable pause,
Right,
I'm just gonna, any information he can give me, because maybe he feels uncomfortable, he'll continue talking.
right,
All that information I'm gonna relay to my buyer, right?
right.
And then we're gonna come up with a price that we're offering. So this also talks about non-contingent offers, what that means. So in a purchase contract, there are 3 contingencies. What's a contingency? A contingency is a time period that the buyer has to where he's able to back out of the deal without losing his deposit. Okay, so there's the appraisal contingency, the loan contingency, and the investigation contingency. Those are the 3 contingencies. So we just know that 3 contingencies: loan, appraisal, investigation. Okay. During the contingency period, the buyer can back out at any time. Now, we're going to make an offer to the seller, and it's going to have the price that we're offering, how long an escrow we need, and that could be dependent upon the lender. If it's a cash deal, we can close pretty quickly. How long we want to investigate the property. All right, so can I get a general inspector in there really quickly? Chimney inspector, sewer inspector, termite inspector. I can make that all happen really fast. And then I might need to get an electrician in or a plumber in there after my general looks at it. Or maybe a air conditioning inspector, anything else that comes up during the general inspection. But anything that my buyer doesn't agree with, he can back out and get his deposit back. There's no risk to my buyer. Now, part of our offer is asking the seller for how much time he's gonna allow us for our appraisal, our loan, and our investigations. And this is part of the terms of the offer. So if we have an all cash buyer and he's saying, I don't care, I'm willing to spend this money, I don't need to investigate the property, cash, it's a done deal. This is talking about that situation. It's against the advice of a broker, because as brokers, we are recommending to our buyer to investigate. Sometimes you're gonna have a steal of a deal and the buyer wants in and they're willing to make a non-contingent offer. It's very risky, but you have experienced buyers willing to do it. So it just talks about that situation of a non-contingent offer. Broker recommendation, again, broker recommends that you do not write a non-contingent offer, but if your buyer is comfortable doing it and is experienced, that's up to him. It also talks about the situation of what multiple offers are. So at times, buyers may write offers on more than one property, and that's a possibility. And it's also possible that a listing has more than one offer. Seller considerations. A seller is responsible for determining the asking price. So if I'm going on a listing appointment, the seller is always saying, what price do you think it's worth? Here's the really, we really have to think about how we're going to answer this question. Obviously, you don't want to lose a listing. That's money in the bank, right? We want a listing. So as a seller, if you were interviewing agents and asking the agents what they think the property's worth, you as a seller are going to probably want to list your property with the agent that gives you the highest price.
Yes.
It's just a natural feeling, right? There are agents out there who will give very high prices just to get listings. And they probably feel like if it's not going to sell, and I'll get a price reduction later, right? If it doesn't sell. So if you take a high price listing, make sure you have a lot of time on your listing. Don't take a 30-day high price listing, because what's going to happen is it's not going to sell. And then the seller is going to be upset with you. Another agent is going to come knocking on that door as soon as it expires, and they're going to list it with another agent for a lower amount, right? So don't be that person. If you take a high price listing, make sure there's a lot of time on it.
That's a lot of time.
So it depends on the market, and it depends how overpriced you are.
Yeah.
So, but I'm also trying to feel out a seller, what's their reason for selling, right? I want to make sure they're not wasting time also. There's a lot of sellers that say, I don't need to sell, right? And that might not be someone I want to deal with, but I might need to dig a little more to find out
What if they say?
why I'm there.
If they say that this is all I want. I want this price, that's it. Will you take the list and
It depends
it's
on the
not
price.
realistic.
It depends if it's not realistic.
You said, I
So-
want this price, that's how.
So in what situation would I take an unrealistic
how would you say?
listing? If it's completely unrealistic and I have a conversation with the seller that it's an unrealistic number, I will entertain it with you, maybe, but I don't want you to be upset with me when we're having a conversation 90 days from now that there's no action, because I know what's going to happen. Here are the comps I'm showing you.
Right.
But if it's a high traffic area and my sign is going to be in front and I might have publicity and advertising from it, I might do it, right? Because it's going to be advertising for me. But it could also have a negative consequence. People might think I take overpriced listings and everything I have is overpriced. Like I have to be cautious about how I'm perceived with that listing too.
Right.
However, if it's in an area where there's not a lot of things going on and it's going to be great, I'm going to get a lot of calls on it, I can convert that into money. So there are coaches that will tell you for every listing you take, you should get 2 buyers off of that listing, not having anything to do with that listing. Like you should have 2 buyers that have come in that you followed up with. I would say you should have more than 2, but every person that walks in is a lead, is a potential deal, right? So there is a reason to take a listing, even if it's not going to sell that particular property. Yeah.
My question is about contingency removal.
Okay.
If the buyer removed the inspection contingency and appraisal contingency, and he also can get a loan, so the loan is also qualified, still he can back out legally or not?
So if a buyer, so we're gonna talk about contingencies in a second, but basically, if the contingencies have not been removed, then the buyer can back out based upon the contingency. You have 3. So in your situation, you're saying all have been removed?
No, the loan is not.
The loan is not removed.
Inspection
Okay.
removed the
So if
appraisal,
the-
But the loan is also qualified, so there is.
So
no issue
if
with
the buyer wants to back out based upon the loan contingency, this is what you're saying is the only contingency existing, right? That's the only one that still exists.
Yeah.
If he's backing out based upon the loan contingency, then in the offer, when we write the offer, there's a space here for what the loan amount is and what the terms of that loan are. what is the interest rate and how many points. We're gonna need a letter saying that the buyer didn't qualify at that rate with that many points.
we
But
cannot.
if he gets qualified, then you cannot buy that. If he has another reason, something else happened, he found another property, but
But the only contingency you have left is the loan,
Yes.
so you better back out based upon your loan. There's gonna have to be a letter given by your lender that he didn't, something happened with the loan that they can't make the loan.
Oh.
Okay, it could be a title issue that the lender has an issue with.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be that, like, I'm just using this as an example. The reason I'm using this as an example with the rate is because you need to fill this in. If you don't fill in a number here, you can't use that as the excuse.
Or if the
Okay.
HOA is sued or something, and they can't.
So, right, so the lender could have a lot of issues with HOA documents, with something on title. You know, they can always probably figure something out. There's a lot of loopholes in the contract too, okay? A loophole that I saw this morning is an interesting loophole. Well, I just want to show it to you real quick, because this is something I might be calling CAR about to ask. I mean, the reason for these loopholes is not for you to break a contract, right? I mean, every contract has things, but we need to be aware of them to protect our clients. I mean, that's so the seller has an obligation within 7 days to give disclosures. So here it says seller delivery of documents 7 days after acceptance. So generally a seller has 7 days to deliver disclosures, right? If we had an acceptance on Friday of last week, by tomorrow, the seller would have to give the disclosures, right? Normal. Now, this is a really weird one.
all of them are calendar days.
Everything is calendar days except the deposit.
Except the
The deposit has to be within 3 business days because banks aren't open on holidays or weekends. So that makes sense. But everything is calendar days and it's from the day of acceptance. It doesn't even matter what day you open escrow. You know, everyone's like, oh, let's open escrow, open escrow. It doesn't matter. It's from the day of acceptance, right? So if we had an acceptance on Friday at 6 p.m. Friday, escrow doesn't open until Tuesday because we had a holiday Monday. It doesn't matter when escrow opened. All the days started counting Friday. Right? Yeah,
You said there's only 7 days for the seller to give disclosures
by default.
by default.
But
How
if you-
much time does the buyer have to do the investigations? How much
So
time?
that you're gonna write that number in, we're gonna talk about it. But here is something I wanted to show you. It says the buyer's investigation of the property. There's a clause here that says the seller shall make the property available for all buyer investigations. The seller is not obligated to move any existing personal property. The seller shall have the water, gas, and electric all on for inspections. Okay, so all utilities need to be on for inspections. Buyers shall complete their investigations and satisfy themselves and either remove the contingency or cancel the agreement by the time specified in paragraph 3L3, or this is where I have an issue, or 3 days after receipt of any investigation report, whichever is later.
So can you?
Whoa, look at this clause here. Does this mean that if I have a 7-day inspection period and my inspector comes on day 7, but doesn't give me the report of his investigation for 5 days later,
You out.
and then I have 3 days after that? Like, that's what I'm reading here. It says, or 3 days after receipt of any investigation report. Are you seeing this? I wanted to make sure I'm not
I don't
crazy.
understand. I don't understand.
No, we can.
Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
2 days after.
3 days after receipt of any investigation report.
Whichever is later.
Now, usually it would say here 5 days after receipt, which is in a different area, 5 days after receipt of a mandatory disclosure from the seller, okay, that I understand. If the seller has to give a transfer disclosure statement and they're late on that, I understand that the buyer would have 5 days to approve that. It's a mandatory disclosure. If the seller provides late, yes, 5 days. Buyer has 5 days. But this one really is a question for me because it's saying that
After,
that they can either remove the contingent or cancel the agreement by the time specified, or 3 days after receipt of any investigation report, whichever is later.
so
So
it gives you additional time.
it gives a lot of additional
Lot
time
of
that's open to
Open to anything.
anything. What if the inspector comes and is gone for a week
Yes.
and can't get the written report out for a
Or
week?
just walks out,
So we have another week plus 3 days?
probably.
Like, I don't understand. This is new. I have to call CAR about this. It's crazy.
Maybe they go to 5 days after that, like buyer has 5 days.
No, this is saying 3 days after receipt of any investigation report.
So what if you get notice to perform?
Then there's an issue.
That's what
I
I'm
have to call CAR and find out, and I'll let you know at our next
Thank you.
class what the results were from that. Okay, California Residential Purchase Agreement, we have again, agency, right? We have the fair housing, again. We have the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, again. Wire fraud, again. Okay, here we are, purchase agreement. When you're in zip forms, if you just double click in that today's date, it'll automatically put today's date when you double click. This is a question, so these are things we need to know from our buyer. Whose name is gonna be on the offer? Who's the offer coming from? It's a legitimate question, right? And you want
It
their,
has to be a person, even if it's an.
it's
LLC,
gonna be a
right?
person, or it's gonna be a person as trustee, or a person
If
as
it's an
manager.
LLC, you also need to name a
There-
person.
We need to name a person who's responsible for signing this. Now, the offer can be from an LLC, and you can list the LLC here. But on the last page of the offer, it says who's the designated signer. Now, once you open escrow, escrow is gonna request a copy of whatever paper gives that person authorization to sign on behalf of whatever entity is making the offer. And they're also gonna investigate the seller and make sure that the seller has the right. So we should all be doing basically a title search online. We all have access to Clearmark Title. We should have accounts with Clearmark,
Yes,
because I would recommend you want to see the grantee, who's on it.
immediately.
We want to make sure who it is, and then you may even call the listing agent to find out that that's correct. All right. Okay, so on here, we're going to enter all the property information. We're going to confirm who the listing broker is, and then we are the buyer's brokerage firm. Purchase price, $1 million. I'm going to get into clauses today because we can go through it and fill it out, but I'm going to go into more of the contract stuff. Purchase price, $1 million. I'm just putting a general number there. Close of escrow. I wrote here C3G2 instead of putting an actual date or an actual time period. What is 3G2? 3G2 says close of escrow to be 30 days from acceptance or less by mutual agreement. Buyer is willing to close escrow as soon as lender is able. So that makes our offer a little more competitive.
Said 30 days, you could put 45 days.
You can
but
put
still have the same right.
Some lenders can close in 21 days. So basically what I'm saying is my lender is telling me 30, but there's a possibility we can close earlier. Okay, there are other offers that might be coming in on this property. They're also writing 30 days, but I want my offer to be as strong as possible. So I'm saying my lender's telling me 30, but if they can close earlier, I'll close
30
earlier.
days or less.
Or less by mutual agreement. Everything's by
You
mutual
put
agreement.
45 days, but the buyer will make every effort to close.
This is the way I do it. You can do it differently. My way is not the only way, right? If you have a better way, I'm open to it. No. I'm saying we're all learning from each other. So this is the way I like to be competitive.
If
Yeah.
you don't close in 30 days and the lender's fault, can the seller cancel?
So the seller is agreeing to your purchase agreement based upon your price, your contingency periods, and when you're closing escrow.
So they can cancel.
The seller is agreeing to sell at your purchase price They're giving you the contingency times that you're asking for and agreeing to your closing time. That's what this seller is agreeing to. If you don't abide by those things, then you're out of contract and the seller will have the opportunity to cancel after first giving you a notice to perform. So the seller, before they can do anything, they have to give you a notice to buyer to perform your duty in the contract. And then the buyer has 2 days to
You
perform.
find the lender liable if they're screwed up.
But whenever we're talking about cancellation, there's going to be a test of good faith. Okay, what's good faith?
Good faith.
Good faith means you gave the other party a chance to do what they need to. Okay, so now in your situation, let's say that the loan contingency was also removed. There are no more contingencies. And now the buyer has to close escrow at a certain time, and the buyer is having trouble closing. So if I was the seller and I'm looking at that deposit now, okay, the seller doesn't automatically get to keep the deposit. So there's going to be the good faith rule on this. Did the seller give adequate extension time for the buyer? Okay, so if I'm going to give you a note, I'm not going to give you at this point a notice to perform. I'm going to give you a demand to close.
Demand.
Okay, so you have 3 days to close escrow. Now, I'm probably not going to give you that demand to close right away. I might wait 2 days. Why? It shows.
After the 30,
But after the on day 32, I'm going to give you the demand clause. Why did I wait an extra 2 days? Good
good
faith.
faith.
Okay. And then even after the 3 days, when I'm allowed to cancel, I might even wait an extra 2 days
Oh,
to cancel. Why? Good faith. Then
they can cancel without.
then I have a pretty legitimate reason to
without
keep.
notice to perform.
Then there's no notice to perform anymore because
Don't need it.
now we're talking demand to close.
Oh, okay.
So now, as a seller, I can probably keep your deposit. Now, I might have to fight for it.
Right.
Okay. In California, it's very rare that a seller will be allowed to keep a deposit if the seller did not suffer a loss.
Oh, okay.
So if the seller puts the property back on the market and sells it at the same price or more, the buyer will probably get his money back.
No, but
Because there's no
that's gonna be why.
damages.
But no, but that's gonna be why. How do we know?
No, I'm just saying, there have to be damages, right? We're agreeing to liquidated damages, which we'll talk about. If there's no damages, there's no damages.
No, but if they put it on the market and sell it, that's another 2 months. So what happens to the deposit? meanwhile?
The buyer meanwhile is not releasing it so fast, because don't forget, everything through escrow has to be by mutual, both parties have to sign. At this point, the buyer is hiring their attorney, right? And everyone's trying to negotiate something. So,
Yes.
okay, so deposits in LA, I mean, around these parts,
Right.
we ask for a 3% deposit. The reason that we ask for a 3% deposit is because of liquidated damages. So what are liquidated damages? Liquidated damages, it's very hard to determine
It's
what,
additional money, right?
it's very hard to determine what the damages are actually to a seller in real estate. It's very hard to determine. Now, what liquidated damages are, everyone is agreeing that 3% will be the damages.
Say that.
That's what we're agreeing on. It's called liquidated damages. Instead of trying to figure out something, we're going to go with 3%. Now, why would a buyer want to sign liquidated damages? Because it limits their liability to 3%.
The 3%.
If a buyer doesn't initial, or the seller doesn't initial. So in California, real quick, we all should know this. In California, you can have a contract that is enforceable, and the parts that require initials by both parties, if they're not initialed by both parties, they're not a part of the contract. Okay, so I can write an offer for my client, or we'll write the offer. We will initial this box 29 and box 31. We'll initial those two places, and then we send our offer. The seller accepts it. They sign on the last page, and they initial everything except these boxes, we have an accepted offer, but these things are not part of the agreement. Okay? Yes,
So I have a question, what happens if, like, I've had TCs that have gone in and like cleaned up because we missed a signature, and does
Yeah.
that change the way that?
I'm only talking about optional initial parts.
Okay.
So. Yeah, so basically, if you want to add in, if you want to add into your offer a clause that says seller agrees to initial these, that maybe we should be adding that. I might add it to my offer. Seller agrees to initial paragraphs 29 and 30. So, when we write our offer and those are initial, when you guys send it through DocuSign, these are actually, everything in DocuSign, it's gonna be yellow, except these are gonna be white with an outline. And when you click on them, you're gonna get a little pop-up window on the right, and there's gonna be a checkbox there for read only. You wanna check that read only. Okay, make it, because your buyer really does intend to initial this, and you can have the conversation with them about liquidated damages. I would recommend having a conversation. But it's possible that they won't initial it by accident. So I always do read only. I know other people that teach this contract course also do the same thing. So I'm comfortable recommending doing that, but again, it's optional. They don't have to. So you might want to have a conversation.
I also understood that liquidated damage cannot be more than 3% under any
Okay.
circumstance.
Okay, let's read this. It says liquidated damages if the buyer fails to complete the purchase because of the buyer's default. So the buyer has removed all of their contingencies and then they can't close. Okay, the seller shall retain as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 1 to 4 units, one of which the buyer intends to occupy, the amount retained shall be no more than 3%. So this says that the seller is only able to keep the deposit actually paid, which can't exceed 3%. So that you're gonna get offered, you're gonna have a listing where someone's gonna offer you a huge number and they're gonna put 5,000 deposit, 10,000 deposit. There are a lot of investors there that are buying properties, flipping properties, and they only want to tie up $5,000 or $10,000.
More than 3%.
You're gonna get an offer. Let's say you have a listing for $3 million and it's a fixer. And you're gonna get 10 investors making offers on your property. A lot of those offers are gonna say deposit 5,000, deposit 10,000.
Less than 3%.
And the agent's gonna say to you, we're doing the deal. We just don't want to tie up that kind of money. Like, there's no reason for us to tie it up. Here's an offer that has no contingencies with a $5,000 deposit.
Oh,
It has no contingencies, like, right? But it's the best deal. It's like, great, no,
Yeah.
they can walk away and the most they can lose is the deposit actually paid. So if you're a listing agent and you get an offer for something, no matter what the offer is, if you're countering it for more money, always write, or they didn't write 3%, always write one of your terms, deposit to be 3% of purchase price. Always counter that, deposit to be 3%, because we want 3%.
Yeah, we know.
This also says, any excess shall be returned to the buyer. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions from both buyer and seller, judicial decision or arbitration award. At the time of any increased deposit, buyer and seller shall sign a separate liquidated damage provision incorporating the increased deposit as liquidated damage.
So
So,
if somebody put 15% down, he's only entitled to lose 3%. He has to get 12% of the money back, the remainder, under any
Correct.
circumstance.
the
Well, I
buyer
mean,
and the seller both needed to initial
yeah,
liquidated
initial
damages.
that, yes.
And if the buyer insists to have 5%.
Deposit,
No, the ends money deposit, yes.
yes, okay. The buyer wants to give a 5% deposit.
Yes, he thinks
Okay.
that the offer looks stronger. Do you agree?
That's fine, but the seller can't keep more than 3% if the buyer doesn't do the deal.
It makes it more stronger. yeah.
It's the deposit paid not to exceed 3%, so that's fine.
Yeah.
They can have a bigger deposit. I mean,
They don't lose that 5%.
now, I have clients that, you know, if they really, really, really want a property, they might release funds to the seller. Immediately upon acceptance, they'll release funds.
Oh,
All right, now, it's dangerous to do that,
wow.
but
So that's-
they've gotten properties because of that.
No, it
So you just have to be really careful about this. If you release funds, there's nothing that's saying that if they back out, they can't get the money back,
can't.
right? But they have to ask, the seller has to give it back. Now, if you, the only thing that might hurt you is if you see, release it as non-refundable,
Oh.
right? So you just have to be really careful.
Oh, yeah.
If whenever you're doing something like that, I would advise you, talk to Michael Rosales. He's their broker. He's also an attorney, real estate attorney.
Yeah.
And he's the right person to talk to
Yeah.
if you're doing something like that.
Yeah.
We don't want to get sued, right? Okay, so in this scenario, okay, so I'm writing $1 million offer, 3% deposit, which is 30,000 in this case. This is an 80% loan, so I'm putting 800,000. I'm putting my interest rate and my points in there. The balance of the down payment is going to get automatically calculated, and that's just the purchase price minus the loan amount minus my deposit is the balance that I have to come into escrow with. Now, the contract says that this 30,000 is going to be given to escrow within 3 business days by wire transfer. So automatically in the contract, it's 3 business days. What else? There is a paragraph here that says that if we ask for a seller credit up front, that's where we would do it. In our market here, we're really never using this. There are some times your buyer will be doing like an FHA purchase. They're putting a very low
No, or 0 down.
3.5% down, but then they're asking even the seller to pay for that 3.5%. So it's possible to do it if the lender agrees,
Not around here.
but that's not around here. But that is the place to do it. But maybe places downtown, people can do that. You know, around. It's really hard to find someone who's going to qualify for that type of loan. And the problem with someone not putting 20% down is they're going to have to pay private mortgage insurance. So the loan is just going to cost them a lot more money.
But
You can get a loan with 5% down,
No,
but you're going to pay private mortgage insurance.
the Nate said it doesn't cost anymore that much. on
So
FHA.
there are lenders that might have programs where they're not charging the private mortgage
If you have
insurance,
HFA.
or it's not that much more. So again, you know, different lenders are going to have different programs. I have found that when a lender doesn't have money to lend, they raise their rates.
Yeah.
So they're just not competitive. They're saying we're lending, but the rate is ridiculous. When a lender has money that they want to lend, they lower their rates and then they get business. Now, there's a box here. It says seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. And this is seller's broker offer to compensate buyer's broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. SPBB. I'll have to investigate that one. That's a new one. Okay. Seller agrees to pay obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under separate agreement. Really curious of those. Okay. According to this contract, verification of all cash to close is attached to the offer. So we want to submit proof of funds. Proof of funds is the entire down payment or the entire purchase price if there is no loan. And proof of funds is going to be a bank statement. It's showing the balance of the cash, a current date, and the name of the buyer. So sometimes people will send you a screenshot of a dollar amount in a bank, but there's no date on it and there's no name.
So that doesn't.
That's not, I mean, for me, I wouldn't accept that. You can try submitting it, but the listing agent's gonna be like, how old is this? Where's it from? Yeah. My goal is to get my offer accepted. All right. Verification of down payment is attached to the offer. So all cash offers, it's automatically assumed that the proof of the cash is there. Verification of down payment attached to the offer. It's assumed it's going to be attached to the offer. Verification of loan application. There's different types. There's a pre-qualification and there's a pre-approval.
JJ,
Yeah. I want to keep going. I don't want to miss it. Unless,
Just a quick question.
yeah.
If you have an all cash offer, can you still write that the buyer has, the right to also do financing with the cash offer? Can you do it?
So yes, yes. So well, you're going to be writing your offer for all cash.
All cash, let's see if he wants to.
And then I would, in additional terms, I would write in that the seller will cooperate with an appraiser if the buyer elects to get a loan. Because the seller has to let the appraiser into the house. If the appraiser can't get in, your buyer's not getting a loan. So I would just I would tell the listing agent, I would have a phone call with the listing agent, we're all cash, here's the proof of funds. The buyer might want to put some debt on the property.
Got it.
And we just want you to cooperate with the appraiser if it comes, but we don't care, we're doing this deal in cash. Okay, so there's different things here, pre-qual and pre-approval. Pre-qualification means that the lender verbally qualified the buyer based upon what they were told. Pre-approval means the buyer submitted credit scores, assets, they're approved. Fully underwritten means they're ready to go. And the only thing that that the lender cares about is now going to be the appraisal, probably. That the property has to check out. The buyer is fully
You
approved.
don't have to
Like
do-
what if you have a buyer that has $30 million cash in the bank and they're going for a $1 million property, right? And they're going to get a loan on it, right? That's a fully underwritten person by that bank for sure, but the property has to qualify. Okay, so that fully underwritten pre-approval means everything about the buyer is 100%.
But it's not required.
I mean, in that case, you're showing cash, but look, some people look at taking a mortgage against a property. They look at it like the bank is sharing the risk with them. They just view some people look at it like it's a shared risk. If you have all your money in a property, your money is at 100% risk. If the bank has their money, it's their risk, right? Your risk is just your equity in the property. But the bank has the majority of the risk,
So
the lender.
fully underwritten, normally if they put credit, why would they want to do that if they don't, if those things don't go through, they have to probably redo it again, no?
I don't know, we can talk about it, I don't know. Okay, final verification of condition. Right before closing, the buyer has 5 days, or you can change that a day, just to go into the property. Now, they can't back out based upon the final verification of condition. It's not a contingency. It's just a final walkthrough to see that there was no damage caused by the movers. Movers could cause damage, banging into walls and stuff. They can scratch floors. We want to make sure that the seller has made repairs if there were any. We want to confirm that the repairs were made. Usually, if there is an issue, we can instruct escrow to withhold a portion of the seller's proceeds. So let's say there's a giant scrape in the floor. It's going to cost $500 to fix it, $1,000 to fix it. We can send an instruction to escrow. Please hold $1,000 to cover that until the seller fixes it. Then we'll release the $1,000. Like everyone wants the deal to close. Let's get the deal closed. But if there's an issue, maybe escrow could just hold a piece of money just to cover
Why
it.
would the seller agree to that? So I'm not gonna,
Well, it's damaged.
was damaged.
Yeah, it was damaged before close of escrow.
Before.
Okay, assignment. This is something interesting. There are a lot of investors right now that are making offers that really don't have a buyer.
No intention to buy.
No, their intention is to sell their
Yeah.
contract
Somebody.
to someone else.
Wholesale.
Wholesalers, yes. They will make an offer on it, they will show proof of funds, they will get into contract, and then they will sell the purchase contract to another buyer. It's happening a lot.
That's fraud.
If you see all these things on the internet, or you hear about cash for your property, those cash offers, a lot of those cash offer people are flipping, they're wholesaling. Yeah. Now, they might make a very good cash offer,
But it's fraud.
but it's not fraud.
It is fraud.
It's not fraud. It's not fraud. I mean, they're basically making you an
You
offer and it's up to the seller if they want to take the offer.
No, but I heard that if they do that.
It's not fraud.
It's not.
What needs to happen is when the buyer is selling the contract, they need to make the seller of the property aware if they're making money on that transaction. There's a disclosure, the transfer disclosure statement for that deal. The person who's in contract that wants to assign it has to disclose to the property owner how much they're making. So if I have a property and you come and you give me 1.5 million and I sign a contract, we have a $1.5 million contract, and then you go to sell it for 1.7, you're gonna send me an assignment form and it's gonna say that your new contract is 1.7 and you're making 200,000. I need to approve it. I, the property owner, need to approve
The
it.
seller needs to approve.
Seller needs to approve it. Now, I can't unreasonably not let you do it.
I didn't know that.
I have to agree if it's reasonable. The question is what's reasonable?
I was gonna say,
What's reasonable? So what's reasonable? Okay, now,
Who defines that?
okay, so, right, who defines it? Now, this is talking about, the reason this assignment request is here is really about changing entities that you own. Like you made an offer in your name, but you want to put it in your LLC or your trust, right? You have ownership in that entity. That's really why this is here.
Exactly.
It's really why it's here. However, it can be used to transfer to a third party. Now, if you're going to do a transfer to a third party, I recommend that you only do it with all contingencies removed. Okay, do your deal with the first party, have them do their inspection, whatever they need to do, have them remove all contingencies, and then they can transfer, because the transferee is now taking a deal with no contingencies.
Obligated.
Okay, and I would also make sure that the original buyer is still on the hook if the transferee doesn't complete the deal.
And
Okay,
that's the only part of the contract where there's not.
The-
form to transfer.
there is a form. No, there's a form. There's a form that's gonna say, this is the new buyer, and this is how much I'm making on the deal. Yeah, and the seller has to sign it
So,
and approve it.
so if we do it here, the broker has no problem with us doing it. So I want.
If the if the property owner agrees, there's no problem.
Okay, so Rosales is gonna.
Rosales will approve it,
Okay.
because he's gonna approve it based upon the seller knowing that there's a profit being
Right.
made and contingencies should be removed.
So we can be wholesalers in here.
You can be a wholesaler, sure. Now, you got to be careful that you're not going to be accused of fraud.
That's what I'm saying. I asked
Right.
if it's fraudulent or no.
Well, it's not fraudulent to do honest dealing.
It's not honest. Some people, I mean.
If
some
you're
brokers say
if you're buying the property to flip it, that was your only intention,
That's it.
then are you making that disclosure to the seller?
We're gonna make it, but
Look, I can be a seller and say, I'm happy to sell you my property at 1.5 million. Go try to sell it for more. I'll take that risk with you.
no, I know, but this is.
I'll take that risk with you. No, I'm a seller. I have a property.
Right.
You're making me an offer for 1.5 million. I think 1.5 million is a good deal.
But
I'll
it's
take it.
not
I'll
that-
take it. I know that you're gonna back out if you can't resell the contract. I'm okay with it. Because you disclosed it to me. You told me that. Right? It's not fraud. If I'm okay with it, I'm okay with it. Okay, so there are situations where it's okay. It's just the fraudulent part, right? I might not be okay with, even though I'm okay with it now, when I see you're making 200,000, I might not be so
That's
okay
what
with
I'm
it.
saying. So it's
Right.
a thin line. You have to be careful. Don't do it.
But you might say to me, I'll give you half of it.
Half of it, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Give me half of it, I
Yeah,
approve.
then I'm cool. You make 100, I make 100. Okay, then I'll approve it.
Something like this, just let Rosales.
So again, just, get Michael Rosales involved. Yes.
I have a question. So I've seen this kind of contract, but they say the name of the person or assignee. So when you get to the
Okay.
assignee, they don't have to go ask the seller.
All right, so I do want to also add, there are a lot of companies that will try to use not a California contract.
No, in California.
Okay, no, but I'm just saying, like, we use the CAR contracts. There are a lot of companies that are gonna have their own version of a contract. It's gonna be a 1-page contract or a 2-page contract.
Yeah.
always use the California Association of Realtor contract.
Right.
Never use a
Yeah,
non-CAR
but
contract.
if I go-
Never. I'm using the word never. I don't want to use the word never, but really, always, we are insured by CAR and our E&O insurance if we use the form, if we use our forms. We're insured.
But
for that.
if I put the.
And or assignee, yes.
Or assignee, then the seller doesn't need to sign because I'm gonna be the owner of the.
So if you write your offer and or assignee, then the seller at that point should question it, or the listing agent should be questioning it. Why are you putting that?
Right, and if
So
they
if I,
really-
as a listing agent, receive an offer and it says and or assignee,
Right,
I'm gonna call you and say, why did you put that?
and I said.
What's
because
your
maybe
answer?
I
Yeah.
changed it to LLC.
Okay,
or-
that's fine with me.
but-
Now, this still applies,
Right,
like,
but if I go
you
sell.
you have an
it-
answer for
No,
her?
no, I have-
Oh, okay.
But if I go sell it, then I don't need to ask the owner that, I don't need to disclose to the owner that I'm making this much money because I can sign it.
If you're transferring the transaction,
Right,
you always need to disclose to the seller how
Yes.
much you're making.
even if
Yes.
I'm on the
Yes,
assignee.
the seller needs to know everything going on, always. Yes, there can't be a hidden profit anywhere.
Yeah, you can.
Right, well, I'm sorry.
So what are the issues with using that out of state contract? What?
The
because they're not
issue
insured
is, it's not,
For the seller. if I'm not
the
insured.
issue with not using a realtor contract
Uh-huh.
is that there are so many issues not being discussed.
It's not,
Whoever wrote that contract, it favors them,
yeah.
right? This contract is trying to be equal to everybody. It's trying to be this is a fair contract for the buyer and the seller. Someone who writes a contract,
Uh-huh.
it's being written in favorably to the person paying to write that contract.
We're dealing with the listing right now. We're trying to get this listing up to someone who's gone directly with the wholesaler. And they're trying to use out-of-state contracts, and now they're going through this whole thing where they're not able to sell it.
Because
They're-
of some clause
Yeah,
that
there's-
No,
and so
CAR would
now it's
never.
gonna fall out, but also the benefit from someone who wants that listing is that it never hit the MLS,
Mm.
because it's all been this private
Right,
deal. before.
right.
But
We're
it's-
gonna see a lot of this,
Lot of
a lot of this.
It's very,
So it's very important to use the CAR contract. Very, very important. Yeah, question?
He has one too.
Oh, there's a lot of questions.
No,
You're the
no, I mean,
question.
so if my buyer is not closing within this office and I transfer it to this buyer, we don't need to cancel, just do a transfer to this buyer, is that okay? So I have a deal.
We're gonna talk about specific situations later. Yeah.
I just
I
want
wanna
to
get this.
see, should we cancel or just transfer it to his buyer?
Anything that the buyer and seller both agree to is totally
It's
fine.
fine.
It's totally fine. As long as the buyer and seller both agree,
Got it,
right? So escrow
just disclose.
is a neutral party, and they won't do anything unless the buyer and seller both agree.
Got it.
So same thing, as long as the buyer and seller agree,
Agree is
and
fine.
it's in writing and everyone signs, no problem.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So this is regarding wholesaling.
Wholesaling, yes.
What is this for?
We're looking at the RPA, just the purchase agreement.
And then just to kind of clarify, I don't know if you talked about this or not. So let's say you get this deal as the person who's buying it to wholesale it,
Okay,
you do not need to put a deposit.
no, you need to put,
Oh, yeah.
well, the seller needs to agree to your deposit amount that you wrote in your offer. We were just talking about the
Should it be
transfer.
zero?
You can write an offer with a zero deposit. No, there has to be consideration.
$1.
You need some consideration to
Could
make
be
it a valid
$1.
California
I'm just
contract.
trying to, you know,
Yeah.
it could be $1.
It could be just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what a reasonable consideration is for a real estate contract. Yeah,
Okay, just curious.
there has to be consideration. So
Thank you.
I don't know where that red little, I don't know where that red arrow came from. That's weird. Okay, so. Okay, so the final verification of condition, we're gonna go in the property right before closing, just make sure there's no damages. The assignment request 17 days. So that means the buyer has 17 days, up to 17 days to request an assignment. If you're gonna do an assignment, make sure contingencies are removed. By default, the loan contingency is 17 days. The appraisal contingency is also 17 days. I would call the lender and say, how long are loan processing times and appraisal processing times. We wanna lower this if we can to make our offer more attractive.
14 days.
If the lender says I can do an appraisal in 7 days and close in 14, amazing. It's amazing, right? There might be times where the lender needs 21 days for the loan approval. If interest rates go down a full point right now, everyone's gonna be refinancing and the lenders are gonna be swamped, right?
Yeah.
So they're gonna need time. Investigation of property, you don't need 17 days to investigate a property. I can get on Yelp right now and get a inspector for anything I need to inspect and get someone there today or tomorrow. I can't, like, I don't need this long. I might want to shorten it to 14, 12, 11, 10, 9, 7. It depends what I'm competing against. If I'm the only offer in town, there's no reason for me to shorten this. If I'm competing with a lot of other buyers, then of course I'm going to shorten it. But I don't need to shorten this if I'm the only buyer.
By shortening it makes it more attractive.
Yeah, to a seller, because the seller cannot make their moving plans until the buyer's committed. Right? Because I'm not going to pay for my mover and move my furniture out until I know the buyer's on the hook for at least their deposit, right? So once I know the buyer's removed all their contingencies, their deposits at risk, then I can comfortably continue my purchase, sign my lease, right? Pay for the moving.
Hey, JJ, the buyers pay for the inspections, right?
Yeah, buyers pay for all their inspections, yes. Now, you can request the seller to do it, but if the seller's paying for it, they're hiring their own. There's a conflict of interest. No, if there's a conflict of interest. If the seller is hiring their own inspector, they're gonna say, hey, go easy on me, I'm paying for it.
And you would have your client pay them directly, the inspectors?
Yeah, so the inspector should be, making arrangements with the client, how they're getting paid prior to showing up or getting paid while they're there. Now, the inspector may not give their report until they get paid. They'll do the inspection, but they're not releasing their report. Yeah.
So you would put on the, this is offer from your name or signees it.
You can. Now, if you make an offer like that, the listing agent will probably be calling you and asking you why you're doing it that way. And then you need an answer for that.
Disclose.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
you got to be careful. I mean, as a listing agent, your antennas need to be up and just looking at all the terms.
Cool, thank you.
Review of seller documents. I'm suggesting that you shorten all of your contingencies if you're in multiple offers and you want to have a really good offer that is going to beat out other offers. You want to lower these numbers, but not unreasonably. 12 days is a reasonable time to investigate a property. Informational access to the property just means that you can still get in, even if you remove your contingencies. You can leave that 117. It just means that you have 12 days to remove your inspection contingency, but you can still get access to measure or whatever you need to do. Review of seller documents. So this is by default 17, that can be shortened. So the seller is going to give you disclosures, and then how long do they have to review it? So here are 12 days after acceptance or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So that can extend, if you give them disclosures after, late, they could basically have an additional 12 days to back out. Your buyer could have an additional 12 days to review it. Or 7, if this number here, it's whichever is later. So if there's a number, if I put 3 here, it would be 5 days. So this is where the 5-day thing comes in. Any disclosure that's given to a buyer, they have 5 days to approve it. So we want to make sure all our disclosures are given on time. They're going to get a title report. The buyer has time to approve common interest disclosures, which are HOA docs. If you have a house that has solar equipment, anything leased, you want to make sure to get a copy of that lease from the seller, because we're going to have to give that to the buyer. Time of possession. So basically this says that the keys will be handed over to the buyer at 6 p.m. on the date of closing. And it says upon notice of recordation or 6 p.m. So usually what happens is title and escrow will call you probably anywhere from 11 a.m. up until later. That congratulations, we recorded. This is a phone call to your client. Congratulations, not a text message. This is definitely a phone call. Thank you for your business. Got great news. We closed. What is closing? Closing is just the recording of the grantee. That's really closing. And then escrow does the final calculations on everything. But the deed gets recorded downtown.
8 a.m.
8 a.m. It's stamped 8 a.m. Once escrow is made aware that, or once title confirms that it's been recorded, you can hand those keys over to the buyer. What I usually do as a listing agent is I'll have a lockbox on the property with keys, a combo lockbox. If I didn't have a Supra, I will give that code to the other agent once I have confirmation of recording. And I'll say your buyer could go anytime. Here's the code. Seller occupied or vacant units. So if you're using this is basically saying you're gonna get a close of, okay, so if you have a seller that's gonna stay later than closing.
29 days.
If you have a seller that's gonna stay past the close of escrow, right? There are 2 boxes here. You're gonna check one of them. So this is 29 days or fewer and 30 days or more. These are 2 different documents. If it's a 29 days or fewer, that's the seller in possession form. It's a license to stay. It's just a license. It's not a lease. They have a license to remain in the property. If it's 30 days or more, it is a lease. It's a lease back. So got to be careful. California laws on leases right now, a little crazy.
Forms are more complicated. There's a form that needs to be filled out on both.
There's forms on both, but I would really suggest you just have a 29-day.
The other form is.
I would suggest having a 29-day license to remain, because then the sheriff can come and kick them out. Once you start signing a lease agreement, you're in murky water. So, all right. If you're gonna sign this lease agreement, this 30-day or more lease agreement, you want to have a clause in there that the rent will go to some astronomical amount after 30 days or after whatever time you agree to. That will protect the seller. Right. That will protect the buyer, that they're going to get a crazy amount of rent. Like, you know, and don't forget, this seller just collected a lot of money from selling the property. So they have the money. Right. And also you might want to have rent held in escrow for the time period. Right. So there's different ways of navigating that. And I would navigate it strongly if I knew that the seller was someone I need to be suspicious or careful with. You know, it's different people, you know, you're going to know what the seller's story is. If the seller has no place to go, right, you got to be careful. Just know your customer. This contract is basically saying you're going to get a vacant property. What time did we start?
12:30.
12:20.
Okay. So
Can we go move the car?
there's no in and out in the parking lot here.
No, no more.
No more.
No more.
What did you do?
You
Meter?
used to be able to go out and come back. in.
There's no, you used to be able to make a little U-turn.
No, they, no.
Now you can't. Yeah. They
do
record,
it
the
now.
camera records the plate.
Oh, nice.
All right, seller has 7 days. Seller has 7 days to give disclosures. The buyer has 5 days. Actually, the buyer and seller have 5 days to return their signed escrow documents to escrow. The seller has 3 days to pay for 3 days to order the HOA documents. This is an interesting one. The seller has 7 days to install smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. As a listing agent, I used to not call the retrofitting company to do the smoke alarms and the carbon and the water heater until the buyer removed all their contingencies. Because I don't want to obligate my seller to pay for this unless they know the buyer is selling. And then the retrofitting company that does this will bill escrow. and they'll get paid at the end of escrow. But here, in the way that the contract is written now, it's obligating the seller to do this within 7 days of acceptance. Yeah.
I think if we don't do it, appraiser can go there.
So,
and not-
all right.
not do it.
So there are some agents that will keep a carbon monoxide detector in their trunk, a plug-in one, just for the appraiser.
Just for the-
But yeah, because you're gonna have a retrofitting completion before close of escrow, no matter what. But the appraiser, when they come, they do need to take pictures of the smoke alarms and the carbon monoxide. You can get a carbon monoxide detector that is a plug-in kind, and they can take a picture of that.
Is retrofitting mandatory in every city?
Retrofitting is government mandatory. So in California, you have to have smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, and the water heater needs to be strapped.
Yes.
Now, different cities will have different regulations regarding low flow toilets, emergency earthquake gas shutoff valves.
Yeah.
Those are now, what I've been seeing is instead of the 1.6 gallon low flush, now they have a 1.2 gallon ultra low flush. So that's a new thing now that's starting to get
Pasadena,
enforced. Pasadena, Glendale,
'cause I know.
1.2.
And who does the gas shut off?
So the retrofitting
The
company.
retrofitting?
Yeah.
company? Okay.
I like to use, I use two companies. I use, there's a company in the valley called Echo, ECO, Echo Retrofit. I find they're available right away and they're pretty inexpensive.
Okay.
And then there was a company I used to use, Metro Retro. They bought LGS, so it's like Metro. They're also good. Metro Retrofit. It's LGS. They combine. Interesting business. Also, if there's a pool, you want to order a pool, maybe a pool inspection. Just throwing that out there so you're aware. Inspections I'm always going to have for a buyer are general for sure. If there's a chimney, I want a chimney inspection. And then you have to count them, like 2 chimneys, 3 chimneys. And then sewer line, if it's a house, I want to put a camera down the sewer line. I want to make sure that the sewer line is not compromised. If you have sewage going into the dirt, that's bad. So now there's everything is correctable, or depending what the situation is. I'm sorry?
Can you get an EPA fine for that?
Could you get it? I've never heard of that happening, but usually when there's a major break in the line, you have backups. So,
Oh, yeah, no, it's
Right.
disgusting.
yeah.
JJ, if there's trees going under the thing,
So
but these are expensive.
whenever you see a property that has trees, I mean, 100%, you should always do a sewer inspection. If you have a buyer that doesn't want to pay the $250 to $350 for the inspection,
No,
you
no,
know.
but these are like $10,000. How does the
So-
seller compensate for that?
so basically,
It's a lot.
so you can, there's different ways of, depends on what the line is. I always watch the sewer video. I watch it and I get my popcorn, I watch it.
Say interesting
Right.
stuff there, buddy.
So they put a camera down the line. You want to get to the city hookup. So wherever 100 feet or 75
Right.
feet, wherever the city,
City.
wherever it goes to the city, you want to see it. So basically you have 6-foot sections of line and they connect into each other. At that connection, you get these little creepy crawler roots that come in.
Yes.
The problem is if those roots are not cut out as soon as they come in, they get fatter and fatter and fatter and
Yes.
fatter, and then they break the line. Right? So that's the problem. Then you have a compromised, broken line.
What happens?
So what happens is, I mean, the way to fix it is you're either gonna dig and repair that portion of the line,
So
or
expensive.
you can clean it out, hydrojet it, clean it out 360, and then they can put a sleeve. They can put like a tube, it's like a fiberglass tube that gets inflated and it sprays epoxy 360 degrees all around. It hardens and then you have a brand new tube inside the old pipe. That's totally great. So there's different
So the
methods.
seller has to do it. That's
The
what-
seller doesn't have to do anything.
So they're going to walk away.
Everything is a negotiation.
Okay.
Everything's a negotiation. So, but for the buyer, I think the most important thing is the buyer knows exactly what they're buying. As long as the buyer knows what they're getting, they can ask for a repair, ask for a credit, not get it. If they want to continue, that's up to them. I'm not there to get my buyer the best price. I'm there to get them the deal. Right? Once they're in the deal, they can decide if it's a good value for them. But if I don't have a deal, there's no deal. So I want to get them the deal.
Thank you.
Inclusions. Here you're going to check everything that's included in the property. Just be aware that like refrigerator has an S on the end. If there's a refrigerator in the garage, basically when you check this box, it also includes the refrigerator in the garage, okay? Because it has an S on it. So if I'm the listing agent, I'm gonna ask if I'm gonna give a counter offer, I'm asking my seller, should we exclude the refrigerator in the garage? Now, the buyer may not even know that it's included. I don't know, but just be aware that when they show up on closing day and the refrigerator is not there,
To the S.
they might say, can you put it back? And then you'd have to. Washer and dryer, I'm asking for it if I'm writing this offer. Okay, natural hazard zone disclosure report. The seller is obligated to give a disclosure to the buyer saying it's in a fire zone, flood zone, earthquake zone. The seller has to do that. We hire a third-party company to do it. My NHD is great.
HD seller.
Can you see what
The
various
sell,
against-
I check that the seller is gonna pay for this report, yeah. Now, this is a very, very sneaky thing that I added in here. I don't know if I'm recommending this or not. I'm just putting it in there. You can decide how you wanna do it. In Q2, I wrote termite clearance report that the seller will pay for, termite clearance. Now,
The part one,
so this is a very sneaky thing to do in your offer. I'm just putting it in there to tell you this is possible if you want to ask for it. If you're asking for termite clearance, you're asking in advance that the seller pays for the termite work. Because you're not asking for a termite report, you're asking for the clearance report. The clearance report can only be given after the work is completed. So it's a sneaky way of getting the seller to agree. Okay, the purchase contract used to have a wood pest addendum. It used to include a separate addendum that asked the seller to pay for termite work, section 1. Now there's something called section 1 and section 2. Section 1 is actual damage. Section 2 is preventative maintenance. So section 1 means there's termites, we need to fumigate. There's wood rotted, we need to repair it. That's section 1. Section 2 would be like screens are open, they need to be fixed. That's preventative. It's not really considered damage. Usually the seller will agree to pay section 1.
Yeah.
Usually.
so you write it to see if they opt.
So the reason that the California Association of Realtors removed that addendum from the contract is an interesting reason that they removed it. When they originally put it in the contract, they expected listing agents to order a termite report when they got the listing. So the seller knew how much the damage was up front. But in reality, there was no listing agent ordering a termite report when they got the listing. And sellers were agreeing to a repair that they didn't know the cost of. That's why they got rid of it. So they're saying to buyers, do your own inspection on termite now. It's part of your regular investigation. When you order your general and your sewer and your chimney and your pool inspection, order a termite inspection.
And that's negotiation, you still to ask the seller to pay for it.
So the buyer can ask this, after the buyer completes their investigations, then at that point, the buyer can request from the seller to make a repair or a credit to cover the repair. I would always recommend credits because the seller is going to do the cheapest repair possible.
Right.
Also, if I'm representing the seller, I don't want to give the repair because then the seller's on the hook for the repair. What if the repair didn't work? Then all of a sudden my seller's getting called, hey, your repairman did a lousy job. Well, give a credit, let the buyer be responsible for it. They'll do it, better job, whatever. Then it's the buyer's problem. I would always recommend credit. Now, the seller doesn't have to agree to it. The seller agreed to sell at a certain price, as is. The buyer made an as is offer also. Their offer was as is, they know the condition to be right now. Now, if the buyer's done inspections and they're aware of things that they were not previously aware of, that's what they're asking for. But the seller doesn't have to agree. The seller just agreed to sell at a certain price. So here I checked these government required point of sale inspections. There's usually no issue with that. These are government required. So these would be in addition to the smoke alarm, carbon monoxide alarm, and water heater strapping, right? Because anywhere in California, you have to have those three things: smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater has to be strapped in case of an earthquake. These additional things are the low flow toilets, the gas shut-off valve.
Yeah.
All right, escrow fee. Different agents fill this out differently.
Each pay for their own, right?
So usually they'll pay the buyer will pay the escrow fee for the buyer, the seller will pay the escrow fee for the seller.
They're not equal.
I wrote here that they both pay the same low rate. The reason I fill it out that way is because I have a feeling that there are listing agents out there that are getting super, super great deals on their listing side, but the buyer is getting a full price escrow on their side. So it's a really unfair advantage to the listing side because they're getting a really cheap fee, right?
What is your language?
My language is that they both pay the same low rates.
Nice.
I want that to be fair. I want my buyer to pay the same rate that the seller's paying.
They have to split it? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I want to pay what the seller's paying. That's all I'm saying. If the seller's getting a great deal, I want a great deal.
Oh, okay.
Usually share is more than about.
I'm saying that there is an escrow company that might say to you, John, give me all your business. I'll do free escrows for you, or I'll do escrows for you for $500 because I'm going to get my $3,000 from the buying side. All I'm saying is I want to pay the same. I want it fair. Fair is fair. I want to pay the same low rate. Okay. Yes.
I have a question. Should they show us the proof of it? What is the proof that we are all going to?
Okay, now, there are tricks that escrow can do. Escrow can have a charge for their fee, but then there's a credit part where they're crediting back the fee. So look, there's games that can be played. I'm just trying to keep things fair. That's all. That's all. I mean, if there's a way around everything. So, but great question.
Thank you.
Okay, we're asking the seller to pay for the buyer's title policy. Now I put in here Cannon Hills, which is our escrow company, Clearmark Title, which is our title company. You guys might have relationships that you want to put in there. We like to use our company. Lauren is awesome. I love Lauren.
But you use the Clearmark.
Ownership of this office owns Clearmark Title, so
Oh,
that's why I'm
Clearmark
putting
Title.
Clearmark Title.
Who's the agent for Clearmark?
Jerry.
Oh, Jerry.
Jerry Ferris.
Oh, no.
Now, we're asking the seller to pay for the the title insurance policy. If the buyer is getting a loan, so this is the one right under it. The buyer's title policy for the lender will be paid for by the buyer. Okay, so the seller pays for the buyer's policy. The buyer pays for their lender's policy. We can't ask the seller to pay for the buyer's lender's policy. That wouldn't be fair, right? So if the buyer's not getting a loan, there's no title policy for a lender. If the buyer elects to get a loan, he's paying for the title policy for the lender, right? Okay. County and city transfer taxes, we're asking the seller to pay. We usually never get pushback on that. Very, very, very rarely. The seller will pay for transfer taxes. Don't forget, we have this new crazy tax in the city of Los Angeles. Really crazy. It can cost a seller 10% to sell their property. So,
Over 5 million,
yeah, over 5 million. Yeah. Okay.
Not even really.
The HOA fee, the seller is automatically gonna pay for that. HOA cert fee, buyer pays for the certification fee. So the lender may require an HOA cert. The buyer will pay for that if they're getting a loan. HOA transfer fees, I want the seller to pay for that. Private transfer fees, it says now that the seller will automatically pay for private transfer fees. Thank goodness. That is the protection for you, because no one used to check that box. Home warranty plan. We're asking the seller to buy a 1-year home warranty plan for the buyer. This is great for the buyer. The seller will usually pay for it. This is how I fill it out. You need an amount there of what the cost won't exceed. And then I add verbiage here, buyer's choice of coverage options. So even though the property doesn't have a washer and dryer, I can still get washer and dryer coverage on my old one because I wrote here buyer's choice of options. So buyer's choice means buyer's choice up to a certain amount. So the seller's agreeing that you can get a policy up to a certain amount. What is a home warranty? If there's a problem with any appliance, electrical, pool equipment, plumbing, usually it's covered under the home warranty. Hopefully they'll cover it. I have really good experience with this company, 210 Home Buyers Warranty. Their website is 2-10.com. They also give warranties for brand new construction. So they started out by working with builders. So when you buy a brand new construction property, builders have a 10-year warranty. There's a 10-year builder warranty. This company started out by insuring builders for those 10-year warranties. So it's a great company.
What was the name of it?
2-10. 2-10.com.
For new building only.
Well, they'll give any policy, but they also provide seller warranties for brand new construction.
Better than the Fidelity or the home.
As far as brand new 10-year construction policies, I don't know any other company that does that. So they might, but I know that they do it. Now, the reason I'm also aware of 210 is they would attend all the Keller Williams functions. So when you go to family reunion or mega camp, they usually have a booth there. They used to. We have a form called the Keller Williams Beverly Hills Affiliated Disclosure Form. I like to include that with our offer because it says that we're related to our title company that we're asking for. We're related to our escrow company that we're asking for. And if we don't disclose that we have an affiliated interest in these companies, it's a conflict of interest. So we have to disclose that we're affiliated with them. This just talks about the initial deposit. The buyer shall deliver deposit directly to escrow. It talks about increased deposits. It talks about retention of deposits. So we talked a little bit about that. Just want to see what I want to get into here. Limits on credits to buyer. Okay. When it's time for your buyer to ask for credits, the credits can't exceed closing costs. Okay, just remember if there's a major repair at the property, if your buyer asks for more than the closing costs, they might be forfeiting the money that they've asked for.
Fraud, there was something big fraud, leakage came down on the second floor. and
So what I'm saying here is this line here.
Closing costs is
So basically, a buyer doesn't have a lot of closing costs. Right, to reduce the purchase price that's the idea. So a buyer's closing costs are going to be prepaid property taxes, their loan fees, escrow, and then their lender title, and whatever the lender fees are. It's not a lot. It's really not a lot. So
Any estimate percentage for that?
I always estimate 1%. I always estimate 1%. I always figure 1% on both sides. Like, I don't know, like a seller, commissions are 5. I always estimate it costs about 6% to sell. And then it could be more based on the tax. And then on the buyer side, 1%. Now, there's ways to increase closing costs. The buyer can buy down the interest rate on the loan. That's one way of increasing the number, right? If they have a 7% loan, they can buy down to 6.5%. So that'll cost a lot of money, but we're trying to spend this money out. So this says if the total credit allowed by the buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit. So we have a contract, we have a request for repair that says the seller agrees to credit $20,000. That's the contractual credit. The seller agreed to credit the buyer $20,000 toward repairs. if the total credit allowed by the buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit from the seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit. And in the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there shall be no automatic adjustment to purchase price. So your buyer could lose out on a lot of money if the closing costs are less than your credit, or are more than, or if the closing costs are less than the credit being given. So if closing costs are 5,000 and you agreed, the seller agreed to give 20, you lost 15 grand from the buyer. So now we want to have a price reduction. Instead of on the request for repair, before I give my request for repair for $20,000, I'm calling the lender and I'm saying, hey, how much are closing costs? Because I'm about to ask for a $20,000 I'm about to ask for a $20,000 credit. And the lender is going to say to me, your closing costs are only 7,000. You better ask for a price reduction. So in my request for repair, it'll say seller agrees to reduce the price to this new price. All right, there's different ways of attacking it.
We can request, towards the closing costs.
Towards closing costs, yeah. I never want to mention the word repair. I never want the lender or escrow to see my request for repairs. I would always recommend, so on the request for repair document, it says on the request for repair document, you can have no repairs listed. There is a paragraph or a line that just says seller agrees to credit buyer this amount of money on the request for repair. My recommendation is never use the form request for repair to send to escrow or the lender. Only use an addendum. It just will, I don't want to, I'm in fear of blowing up my loan. I never want to blow up my loan. No loan, no deal, right? I never want to do anything that will interfere with the loan. Anything that has to do with money, I always clear it with the lender. People think I'm crazy. Like, you know, my clients might think I'm crazy. And I always say to them, look, there's, you know, complain about it now, but clear it with your lender. Just everything, clear it with your lender. Also, when your buyer has an accepted offer on something, tell them not to go shopping on their credit cards to buy furniture for their new house that they're getting, because it's gonna increase their debt ratio, and then they may not qualify. If the lender pulls their credit right before closing, and then their debt ratio changes, it might affect their loan. So just tell them, don't shop for all those things you're getting for your new house yet. Wait till after closing, then do all the shopping you want. We're just really in fear of doing anything to damage the loan. Closing in possession. Basically, I mean, the seller has the responsibility to give an empty vacant property. Let's see, contingencies, removal of contingencies. So this is just talking about contingencies. I just want to see the buyer. So that has to do with loan. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about right here. So the buyer has the amount of time for their loan, their appraisal, and their investigations, right? They have that contingency period. What if we goes past it? So we have 7 days. So let's say we have 7 days across the board for loan appraisal, investigation of property. 7 days. Now it's day 8, and we didn't remove contingencies. Okay, they did not expire. I mean, the contingency still exists. Okay, contingencies have to be removed in writing. They don't automatically, by the passage of time does not remove contingency, is what I'm trying to say. The passage of time does not remove contingency. Contingencies have to be signed off. There's a form, it's called contingency removal. And it's, you check, I hereby remove my loan contingency. I hereby remove my appraisal contingency. I hereby remove my investigation contingency. This says, if the buyer does not remove contingency within the time specified, seller, after first giving buyer a notice to buyer to perform, shall have the right to cancel this agreement. So if the buyer does not remove their contingency, the seller cannot back out yet. The seller first has to give a notice to the buyer to perform, and then the seller will have a right to cancel. That notice to perform gives the buyer 2 days to remove the contingency. after 2 days, then the seller can cancel. Extension, so there is a,
Between that.
yes, so there is a form called extension of time amendment, it's called extension of time amendment. It's an extension of time amendment to extend contingency.
So we'd use that.
You use that,
Okay.
yeah.
And how long can you?
Whenever both parties agree, so it's negotiated. So basically, I mean, the buyer has to either remove contingencies or someone's gonna cancel the deal. I mean, the seller has a right to cancel if the buyer is not meeting their obligations. The buyer's obligation is to put their deposit into escrow within 3 business days, remove all their contingencies on time, and close on time. That's what the buyer has to do.
The seller cancel after the notice to perform, he should still release the deposit.
If contingencies have not been removed, then the seller needs to release the deposit, yeah. Because the contingencies haven't been removed. The only time that a seller might be able to get the deposit is after contingencies have been removed.
Notice to perform is 2 days or 3 days?
2 days,
2 days.
gives 2 days.
It is before, right?
You can't give it earlier than 2 days before the contingency is up. So if we have a contingency up on Friday, this coming Friday, the earliest that you can give the notice to perform would have been yesterday. You can't give it more than 2 days in advance, right? And then it gives 2 days.
Oh, I don't know. Sorry, what if they remove one at a time? Like, is there a way to?
No
like,
problem.
Can you get 6 days there? If you're like, oh, I have one, like, I'm gonna do.
So
remove that
there's-
appraisal.
So there's no problem. You're agreeing to the days that are here. The loan contingency, the appraisal contingency, these are the days. So according to this contract, it has 17 days for loan and appraisal and 12 day for inspection. So we would use the form contingency removal. You can do one at a time.
So
So
do it.
wouldn't that give you more time if for some reason? you-
Oh, well, for sure. Like in this one, I have 17 days for loan and appraisal. So in investigation, I have 12. On day 12, I'm gonna give my request for repair. Either maybe day 11. Day 11 or day 12, I'm giving my request for repair, which is saying I want a credit for this much money. Okay, and then when they agree, I'm gonna remove just my investigate. On the contingency removal form, I'm removing all contingencies except loan appraisal. And then 5 days later, I'm gonna deal with that. Which may be an extension request. Now, just realtor talk. You're usually not gonna have issues if there's communication,
Yeah.
right? If the lender starts telling you, I don't think we're gonna be able to remove contingencies in 6 days or 7 days, call the other agent now and say, this is the issue that the lender's having. Can you please call the lender?
Call it.
Get the other agent involved in talking to the lender and seeing what the real issue is. You want to, again, remove the fear, and you don't want anyone to think you're playing games. Like, let them know what's going on. Keep the communication going. Communication will always save a deal. If you have a listing and there's no activity on it, no one's calling you, there's no showings, there's nothing to report to your seller. You have nothing to call your seller about, and you're afraid to pick up the phone and give them the bad news. You have to keep the communication going. Call the seller. I'm not getting calls. I'm doing this, this, and this. Calls are not coming. I'm just letting you know. I feel bad that nothing's happening. I'm doing everything I can. I'm talking about it, networking it. The only option for you at this point is to reduce the price. We can have that conversation, but I'm keeping in touch with you just to let you know. I hate to make this call again, but nothing's happening. You have to make that call. If you don't make that call, you're losing listing at the end of the listing. Right? Anything else in here? Time periods, okay, we talked about. Oh, one thing I want to point out here regarding inspections. The seller is entitled to your inspections. If you do a general inspection on a property and the buyer pays for it, the buyer's paying for the inspection, right? The seller is entitled to a copy of that inspection.
Yeah.
Not only that, they're entitled to that inspection forever. So 3 years from now, they can be entitled to it, if someone is able to get a copy of it. Yeah,
I was told once that those are my client's inspections and you do not have a right to them, and then they made me split them with them. The price.
so,
Is that, I mean, is it, and then we had something recently, so legally or?
so here's the buyer investigation of property. And it says, so basically, it says here, without seller's prior written consent, the buyer shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destructive buyer investigations. So the buyer can have an inspector, but you can't punch, like, let's say there's a moist wall and you don't know if there's mold on the other side of the wall. You can't punch a hole in the wall to see if there's mold. You can't do an invasive inspection. So that says, no, you can't do that. The seller shall make the property available for all inspections. Okay. And then here, after receipt of any investigation report, which is like, give seller at no cost complete copies of all such reports obtained by buyer, which obligation shall survive the termination of this agreement. So you saw that.
Well, I hear, yeah,
Yeah,
I
so-
guess I got separated.
So the complete buyer investigations. Complete buyer investigations and settlement of the property to either remove zero cancel this agreement. And by the time specified in paragraph 3 or 3 days after receipt of any investigation report, whichever is later, give seller at no cost complete copies of all reports obtained by the buyer, which obligation shall survive termination of this agreement. That is it. Even after escrow cancels, 6 months from now, I can request for the seller is entitled to it.
Makes sense.
Now, as a listing agent, if I have a buyer that's backing out of escrow and they haven't given me their inspections, I don't want them.
You don't want, yeah, you don't.
I don't want their inspections.
Because you don't know.
They could be horrible inspections.
That's what I'm saying.
And it might be a very aggressive inspector that has things there that I have to disprove them. Okay, so now I have bad inspections. I have to hire my own inspector to disprove the bad inspections. And then a new buyer has to bring in their inspector who's gonna look at both the inspections and have their own opinion. So hopefully you're dealing with a good buyer's agent, if you're the listing agent, right? That's willing to invest the time, and the buyer is willing to invest the time and actually look and see what's really going on.
So if you never get those inspections, then you don't have
You have to
to share
disclose
them
them,
with them.
correct? Correct.
Even if it was already under contract. I mean,
No, 'cause I never got them. I can't disclose what I don't have.
okay.
And now we're talking about inspections. An inspection, it's an actual report.
But, yeah,
But bids that don't have a report don't have to be disclosed. Because those are opinions. But if it's an actual inspection, like if a plumber comes to a property and says, this is broken, that's a report. But if they're just giving a bid to fix something that they haven't inspected, then it's just a bid, it's just an opinion.
Can a contractor do inspection?
Can the contractor? Sure.
Contractor. So what if they have like nasty stuff in their wall, like this retaining wall, you know, it's $15,000, blah, 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 blah. And then it sends it to the seller. So the seller now knows all of this. Then what happens? And then if it doesn't close, the seller doesn't want to give credit, and then that goes out.
Right, so we can talk about all those scenarios. We can talk about those scenarios. So I just want to talk about notice to perform. Time periods, so seller right to cancel. Seller has to give a notice to perform. Buyer right to cancel. Buyer right to cancel. If the time specified, seller does not deliver to buyer removal application. Notice to buyer or seller to perform. Here we go. Okay, what does this say? It says notice to perform, notice to buyer to perform, or notice to seller to perform. So there's two different contracts, there's two different notice to perform. Either the seller's not performing its part of the contract, or the buyer's not performing. They shall be in writing, they shall be signed by the person who's doing it. And it needs to give the other party at least 2 days after delivery to take the applicable action. A notice to buyer to perform or a notice to seller to perform may not be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance date to remove a contingency or cancel the agreement. Okay, so you just know that.
Yeah,
It gives them 2 days.
Also, buyer can ask for the for the demand to perform. I mean, the buyer can ask the seller to,
Both they can give notice.
both can give no notice
Both
to
can give
perform.
notice. If someone's not performing that part of the
Both
contract,
can
they give notice. to perform. This is demand to close escrow. Before buyer or seller may cancel this agreement for failure of the other party to close escrow, buyer or seller must first deliver to the other party a demand to close escrow. So this is not a contingency.
No.
We're talking about closing escrow. Okay. And it has to be signed by the applicable buyer or seller and give the other party at least 3 days after delivery to close escrow. It can't be delivered any earlier than 3 days prior. Okay, just you know that one. And then repairs shall be completed prior to final verification of condition unless otherwise agreed. Okay, I just want to, the last thing I'm going to talk about right here is definitions. Nobody reads definitions. Who reads definitions? Nobody reads that. However, this is very, very important because we are talking about days. This is the most important definition here. Days. Days means calendar days. However, delivery deposit escrow is based on business days. Okay. Counting days. Now, this counting days is what I thought I was highlighting. Now, because it used to be this long,
Right.
now it's this giant paragraph. Counting days is done as follows. They didn't give an example because it was such a complicated thing for people to understand. So it says, counting days is done as follows, unless otherwise, the first day after an event is the first full calendar day following the event. For example, if a notice to buyer to perform is delivered at 3 p.m. on the 7th,
That's 0 days.
on the 7th calendar day.
On
So let's say we have an accepted offer on the 1st. Okay. This is, I don't even want to get into it. Basically, counting days. What this says is everything is calendar days. Day 0, everything, and all days are counted from the date of acceptance, right? And it's saying that performance of an act. What's performance of an act? Contingency removal is performance of an act. You have to sign, you're performing a signature on a contingency removal form. That can't fall on a Saturday, a Sunday, or a legal holiday. So we just had a federal holiday on Monday, on Juneteenth. So if you gave, if contingencies were up on Saturday, if contingencies were up on Saturday, the performance of the contingency removal doesn't need to happen until Tuesday. Right? If you give a notice to perform on a Thursday, it automatically pushes to Monday. Right? If you have a contingency that's expiring on Friday, you need to give that notice to perform on Wednesday. Right.
So notice to perform is business day.
Notice to perform is,
It's like-
no, it's all calendar day, but the day that it ends on, if it ends on a Saturday or Sunday, it gets pushed to Monday. If Monday's a holiday, it gets pushed to Tuesday. Okay, now,
Like a business.
when is this also important? This is important when you have your offer accepted, and now everyone has to calculate when the contingencies are up and when closing escrow. So once you have an accepted offer, escrow, it's gonna go to escrow, and then escrow is gonna send escrow instructions. And those escrow instructions are gonna say, here's the date of acceptance, here's the date of closing of escrow, and here's the date that the loan and appraisal and investigation contingencies are up. If those days fall on a Saturday or Sunday, then it gets pushed to Monday. If the close of escrow fell on a Saturday or Sunday, escrow is gonna push it to Monday. Sometimes you're gonna see escrow pull it back to Friday. And you're gonna call escrow and say, no, don't do that, push it to Monday. Now, in reality, you might wanna have closing if escrow pushed to Tuesday, you're gonna have to get approval from everybody. Generally, a lender will not wanna put their money into escrow on Friday. Because they're not getting paid over the weekend for the interest on that money. They don't wanna put the money in until the day before closing. Right, so escrow, banks just don't wanna put the money on a Friday. There are banks that will do it, most don't want to. They'll fund on Monday and close on Tuesday.
How long the escrow can hold money in general?
That's a great question. I used to know the answer.
Used to?
I used to know the answer. I don't think an escrow can hold money. So every month there's a reconciliation.
Right.
And I know that an escrow, you're talking escrow or a broker? Escrow. Oh, I don't know escrow laws. I don't know. I know broker law. I don't know. I don't know. escrow laws.
What's the question to the broker?
The broker
The broker
can't hold more than $200 of their own funds in escrow. $200. But they also can't hold a client's funds for a certain amount of time either. Yeah.
So that's a question to ask the escrow.
Yeah. Why do you need to know that?
No, sometimes there's some money left from rent. or
It needs to be
whatever.
distributed. It needs to be distributed.
No, how long, what's the maximum time?
So I don't know. The answer is I don't know.
Yes.
You have to go ask Pele.
Tell it.
Yeah. All right, I think we're pretty much,
21 days.
any questions from online?
Thank you, JJ.
No problem. Any questions from you?
I have a question for online.
Yeah.
So how do you choose what escrow company to use and who picks it?
So
Is it the
it's a great-
sellers people or is it the buyers
that's a great,
agent?
so usually we always want to try to use our in-house escrow, because if we use our in-house escrow, we're very close to that deal. You can always walk over to Pele's office, right? She'll always help you. In reality, a lot of listing agents have relationships with their escrow. If it's your listing and you're in this office, right, you should be hopefully using Pele. Now, if you use Pele, she will pay your transaction coordinator fee.
TC.
She'll pay the TC fee. The TC fee is $400 or $500 if you represent both sides, and Pele will pay that if you use her. Now, in reality, you might have a listing agent that will only use their escrow or their title company. You can write seller's choice in your offer. If you think that'll help you, I would try to fight for ours.
Okay. So when you're representing a buyer, you should try to use your own escrow company that you have on your end.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
So I wrote, what was your question? I wrote in the offer that we want, because you're gonna be writing your offer. And we're requesting who the escrow holder is. So I'm writing in there Cannon Hills Closings, Pele Keith. You can write there seller's choice, or sometimes a listing agent is gonna give you an instruction sheet of who they're using. And then you can write in there who it is. Usually, if I get an offer on my listing and the other agent is putting a different company in there, or they write seller's choice, in my counter offer, it's gonna say who I'm using for escrow and for title.
Okay.
It needs to be named. I'm not gonna leave it up for negotiation after the contract's accepted. We're gonna get that detail ironed out before the contract's accepted.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. All right, guys, have a fantastic day. Happy Thursday.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Get the same purchase agreement.
We're gonna see you again later today, right?
I'm here. I'm in the office.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
45.
Oh, correct. If you're coming to the new agent orientation, if you've never done that before, yes, then I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, I'll see you there.
There's a new agent.